I think it's some of the most beautiful places that we live in are basically can be challenged by development, and the kinds of development that come basically have very little kind of border boundaries in which they can be contained. The issue that we had together, which was what happened in Denton about in 2006, was a developer came and offered to put in a 2,500 unit development on the other side of the Choptank River from Denton, and as part of an incorporation. And so Denton, considered it, and they're like, well, that's doubling the size of our town. It can't be bad. We'll have, more people for business. And well, the developer came and gave a pretty crummy plan. And the city didn't really have any options at that point to say, well, we want a better plan. Because when you say that, what you have to do is produce a better plan. I think the main problem, there's a number of problems. First, yes, the aesthetics, number one. Number two, where it is and how big it is. I mean, we're talking about doubling the size of a city in less than 3 years. So the question is that the kind of way that cities really want to grow? And I think the answer to that is, well, it depends what you're asking for and what they're building. And I think the lesson to be learned here is that cities don't necessarily have the capacity to grow like that. And what's coming to the Eastern Shore is, our people, is that market demand for developments like this that could literally build out in 3 years. That's 2,500 units. That's 800 units a year for people who are retiring from Baltimore, Philadelphia, and DC, and they're all coming. And they want to come, and they want to be here, and they want to live their life in unpolluted, beautiful skies, and I don't blame them. But the question is, where and how should that come? So, is it any town's one responsibility to take care of all of that? Why should one town burden that problem, have that burden? And I think the answer is, well, the towns really and the counties aren't really working together to come up with a real plan and how to deal with this in a kind of responsible way. So the idea of coming up with a regional plan kind of came along, and beginning to say, well, some of the cities are better in a better position to take the development. For instance, there's this thing called smart growth, and smart growth basically wants to focus all of the growth into urban centers because they have the infrastructure to handle it, and that makes most sense. But a lot of the towns get to a point where they exceed their infrastructure and they have to put in more. So the other issue is, what about the small town that we used to have? Suddenly it's not a small town anymore. The people who lived there, who loved it, kind of said, well, now we're twice as, now we're a city. We're not a small town anymore. Is that fair to me? So these are the issues that come up when you don't have a plan. So the idea that I'd been working on is to say, well, let's not just look at this thing and let life have a plan for you. This is you. They say you have to have a plan for life, or life has a plan for you. In this case here, this happens. When people say, well, we'll just take whatever somebody's offering, and the reality is it may not be what you want. And at that point, sometimes it's almost too late to do anything about it.
Yeah.
So what happened with Denton was basically the town wasn't thrilled with the developer's proposal for the 2,500 units. And they didn't really have any money to do anything. So they said, well, heck, let's go out for a grant. And they did go out for a grant, and they applied to Department of Natural Resources and NOAA, and they got what's called a Coastal Communities Grant, or Coastal Gateways Grant. Now, and they invited this firm called Urban Design Associates from Pittsburgh, who had been doing kind of new town plans for a long time and kind of redevelopment of historic communities like we have. And so they invited them there on an emergency basis, basically, because they were worried that unless they came up with a better plan, that the developer was going to build his version, and they didn't want that. So they came up with a fabulous plan, and of course, people were thrilled with what they had done. But they, the developer wasn't, I guess, particularly interested in building that version. It wasn't as profitable for him, or he had other places where he could go to make more money. So he kind of, I think the county got involved. There was a big lawsuit that was involved with the county and the annexation aspects, and it just got into a huge mess. The beauty of what happened with the Denton pattern book was that it created the basis of something that was started but not finished. The basis of a plan about how a community should really plan and how it can be together, how it can keep its character. All these things are contained in a pattern book, and an easy way to understand how a community can build and should build. So these guys have it down to an art where basically, if you want to put an addition on your house, you basically open the book and it tells you, these are the pages you need to see. Here's how to do it. This is what it should look like, or three or four possibilities of what you can do. Here's where you can buy the materials, and here's how to landscape it. I mean, they give you, it's a soup to nuts thing. It's so easy and beautiful and a lovely way of understanding it. I think it's just, it would really speed the whole process of anybody wanting to do anything on their property. And in the long run, I think the real reason they did implement the town plan, the Denton pattern book for new applications of large scale PUDs like this, plain unit developments. But they did not because I think people got worried a little bit about how it was going to take their property rights away if the only thing you could build was a fancy house, you know, on there. Right. The reality is that really wasn't what the pattern book was saying at all. What happened was they just didn't have enough money to implement it, and they should have sold it a little bit better. And I think in the long run, it could have put a lot of people's fears to rest about what it was really about. It was really about giving people options and making it easy and clear for them to do those options, but they didn't see it that way. Developers like these things. It lets them know what they can do, what's expected of them when they come. Because, you know, if you're a developer, you spend a lot of money in what they call soft costs, which are basically upfront costs for surveying, for, you know, geotech, for resource management of septic and water, all kinds of things like that. So, and the thing that you don't know when you're a developer is what people want and what they're going to let you build. Yeah. And so even though you have by rights, you say the underlying zoning, people can complain a lot about it and puts the kibosh on what you want to do. So in the long run, I think what the best part about this is that it works both ways. It lets people know what is expected for the developer to build. And it also lets the developer know what he's expected to provide. So it's a kind of a two-way street. Up till now, basically, people haven't had anything other than words. You know, it's been what they call Euclidean zoning, which is a kind of a paper zoning, which says, well, you can build if it's so many square feet and if it's so high and blah, blah, blah. But you have no idea what it really looks like. I mean, it doesn't build a picture. This pattern book tells you three-dimensionally and in beautiful color, watercolor actually, exactly what those things are supposed to look like. It's a startling way of explaining how things should be. And believe it or not, the Trappe thing kind of started with a really beautiful plan. I mean, if you really look at the layout, I question why you would want to bring such a big development into a town like that. And because the town in and of itself had integrity, and to add, you know, 4 times the amount of additions to a town is just too much. It changes the nature of the town, even though maybe people, you know, wouldn't have said, well, Trappe isn't much of a town anyhow, but it is. And for the people who live there, they love it. You know, they like it. I think the reality is, was a great thing, and gradually it's been getting worse and worse. You know, and I think if you look at the base plan of what it was very nicely designed. It had open space. There were water features. There were parklands. None of the houses were shown, but you know, eventually when they built the whole thing out, it got more and more dense, less and less open space, more and more about money. And I think that's what happens is, you know, developers come in and make great promises. And then they get into the reality of it, about how much to do it. And gradually it wiggles, it goes away. And then, oh, well, we can't afford that. And, oh, we can't afford to get you a police department. Oh, we can't afford to get you the fire department. You're going to have to wait on the stores, all that stuff, you know, and then people just kind of lose interest. And really what's happened in Trappe isn't so much that you know, that the developer has kind of blindsided them. I think it's just people have lost interest. and they just, it happened 15 years ago and nothing ever came. And here they are talking about it again, and they're just very skeptical. So I think one of the things that I've really found in developments is, unless you have a plan out front that a developer can come in and incrementally change your village, not drop 2,000 people on it. I mean, 2,000 units is more like 7,000 people. Suddenly I think you're behind the 8 ball. If you don't have that kind of provision in place, you're going to be playing an uphill legal battle, and eventually it always does come to a legal battle. That's really where the war gets waged, which is not where it should be waged at all. It should be waged in the front when people are starting to talk about what they want of their town. And a lot of times developers don't even ask. I mean, they don't even have charrettes, which they're called, which are like public design meetings. They need people to come forward, and they need to express, I think this is too big, or I think this is in the wrong place, or I love this and I love that. These are the things that towns really need. This project that I've been working on, which basically is a planning project, will offer a template for 3 or 4 different types of towns to add additions incrementally, so that they will have this kind of planning protection in place, so that if a developer comes, very much like the Denton pattern book should have had in place first, they would have to come under those terms. And if they do better, great. If they do worse, then they're not coming. And in the long run, I mean, we're not saying that we're anti-growth. We're pro-growth, but we want to shape the growth as it comes, as opposed to just letting it happen however it happens. And that's been the mistake all along, really. If you look at the strip development on Route 50 in Queen Anne's County, it's been that pretty much developers come and they buy properties and they put up whatever the hell they want. What we're trying to do is offer Trappe the opportunity of participating and maybe improving everything on the west side. Seeing as the developer has everything covered on the east side, let's concentrate on the existing town and grow that incrementally. And if whatever happens on the developer's side on the east side, then that's great. But at least we will have dealt with the historic town incrementally and correctly, because we're beginning to talk to planning and zoning departments. We're beginning to talk to steering committees and putting this whole thing together. And we're also trying to get as many places in the area to be involved as possible, and then beginning to bring in other projects, like Envision the Chop Tank is another project that's kind of working this way. Eastern Shore Land Conservancy is doing some, so we're beginning to kind of network with these things and try and bring it all together so that we're talking about the same thing.